101 million children around the world are not receiving formal education. And that leaves 897 million people who are unable to read in any language. In the United States, by age 14, only 33% of students are reaching proficient standards in math, and only 34% are reaching standards in reading. At the same time, we currently have 3,360,000 published articles on the science of learning and education. Why is there such a disconnect between what we know about learning and what we do to promote it? Many people believe that the problem comes from scientists and educators speaking a different language, and that the message gets lost in translating scientific findings into educational practice. It seems like a reasonable solution, which would be to just train people who are fluent in both languages and can facilitate the conversation between science and practice. However, we have a lot of people who are currently doing that, and it doesn't seem to be making a difference. An alternative proposal has been made by Bror Saxberg in his book, Breakthrough Leadership in the Digital Age, and in an op-ed piece in the Chronicles of Higher Education. And that is, we don't have learning engineers. In all other scientific fields, there are people who are responsible for fixing large-scale problems by putting knowledge into practice. And we don't have those people for education. We have a lot of learning scientists. And while those learning scientists are probably motivated by and deeply care about fixing this education problem, that's not their job. Their job is to understand learning. And to do that, they start by asking a question. They look to previous scientific findings, they make educated predictions, they test those predictions in isolated and tightly controlled experiments, and then they evaluate their results to inform their next steps. Engineers, on the other hand, their job is to fix a problem. And they start by asking, what is the problem? They also gather knowledge on previous scientific findings, but they also gather knowledge on previously attempted solutions. And based on the combination of those two, they make predictions. And then they test those predictions under real environmental conditions. They also then evaluate the results and use them to inform the next steps. While those approaches may sound very similar, keep in mind their purpose. While scientists are evaluating whether or not they answered the question, engineers are evaluating whether or not they fixed the problem. Consider this approach when engineering an aircraft. We started with a simple glider plane. Some things worked, other things didn't. We kept problem solving. We added an engine, which allowed us to go farther and to go faster. But we kept problem solving. And now we have jet-powered aircrafts that can take us from Beijing to New York in under 15 hours. What's happened with education is that the scientists have been working continuously on the designs. They're writing papers on aerodynamics and having debates about what makes the best engine. All the while, we left teachers with the glider plane. What's worse is that our solution, in the US at least, is just to demand that teachers take the glider plane and perform as though we've given them a jet. And then when they can't fly that glider from Beijing to New York in under 15 hours, we just start taking away pieces of their plane. I work for a company called Branching Minds. Our CEO, Maya Gatt, was that classroom teacher who lived with that problem every day. She had students in her class who she knew were struggling, but she didn't know what to do to help them. What was particularly frustrating and heartbreaking to Maya was that she also knew that it didn't have to be that way. She knew that there were people who understood learning challenges and who knew good targeted strategies to help students with those issues. Locked away in those 3 million academic papers, we do have good solutions, good teaching strategies to help teachers fix that problem. Maya also knew that there were technologies out there that were making smarter recommendations for what shoes she should buy or for what movies she should watch than for what strategies she could use to help her students. So Maya left the classroom to build a solution. She brought together the computer engineers, the user experience designers, the learning specialists, the veteran educators, and me, the learning scientist, to work together as learning engineers to build Branching Minds. Branching Minds is a web app for early and intermediate education teachers that is rooted in learning science and designed with the practical needs of teachers in mind. As education engineers, we started by identifying the problem, and that was teachers need help supporting their struggling students. We then broke that problem down into 3 main component issues. One is that teachers have a hard time understanding why students are struggling. 2, teachers don't know which supports or strategies they should use for those students. And 3, teachers have a hard time knowing if what they're doing is working. So let's examine the first problem. Teachers need help in understanding why a student is struggling. Knowing why a student is struggling is critical for finding the right intervention for that student. Without that knowledge, teachers end up implementing interventions that are misaligned with what that student actually needs. So the Branching Minds solution was to create a survey for teachers to help them identify students' strengths and challenges in the skills necessary for success in literacy, math, and behavior. We already know a lot from the learning sciences about what skills are predictive for success in a given academic domain. And we also know what it looks like when a student is struggling to master those skills. For example, we know that phonemic awareness, or the ability to hear language, sounds, and manipulate them, is really important for learning how to read in English. And we also know that when students have poor phonemic awareness skills, they often have a difficult time rhyming words. So by asking teachers questions like, does the student have a difficulty rhyming words, we can help them narrow in on the reasons why that student is struggling. The Branching Minds platform then provides information and guidance on what those skills are, why they're important for success in a given academic domain, and what it's like for a student who's struggling with one of those issues. After the teachers have identified exactly why a student is struggling, the next challenge for them is to find supports and interventions that are effective for that issue. Fortunately, there are a lot of good interventions out there and teaching strategies. However, teachers don't know what's available and don't know when they should use them. So the Branching Minds solution was to curate these learning resources that are backed by research, and then to link them directly to those specific learning challenges. We include teaching strategies, activities, games, apps, tools, and programs. For each support, we provide the teachers with a description of what it is, why they would use it, how they would use it, and any research supporting it. For free resources, we provide any materials necessary for them to use it. For licensed material, we connect the teacher with the resource site. So having this easy access to quality interventions that are linked directly to that particular student's learning challenge ensures that teachers are using the right supports to remediate the problem. The last component problem that teachers have a hard time knowing if what they're doing is working for that student. In the US, we give an excessive amount of tests to students. So teachers already have a lot of data to evaluate students' performance and progress. However, the assessments that we're giving them are really on the wrong scale. The assessments that we're having them do are long and comprehensive assessments. So one, they're wasting a lot of time, and two, they're not actually informative for gauging a student's progress on a smaller scale. What teachers really should be doing are using what we call curriculum-based measurements, which are quick 2 to 5 minute assessments that have been shown to be really effective at evaluating and predicting student success. They've also been extensively tested, so we know where students should be performing on them at various levels. The Branching Minds solution was to connect teachers to those assessments based on that student's particular learning needs. We then provide the teacher with graphs of the student's scores and help them to interpret progress based on previously collected data. This process ensures that teachers are using the right assessments and they're able to evaluate the progress and determine if what they're doing for that student is actually working. Taken together, Branching Minds was engineered to help teachers meet the needs of struggling students by addressing 3 main pain points: to help them identify exactly why a student is struggling, to connect them with research-backed interventions that they can use for that student, and then help them track and report to see if what they're doing is making any difference for that student. Now, as learning engineers, our job isn't done there. Our job is to evaluate the data coming into the tool and to continue to refine it, and to make the tool perform better for the teachers. And I don't just mean that on the technical side, I mean that on the education side. That's where many current education technology companies are falling short, is that they're not using their data to refine and reconceptualize what they know about the learning process. Fully realize the field of education engineering, we need to use the real-world data we are collecting to inform the science of learning, and then use those new theories of learning to improve the technology. It can't be a one-way street from science to practice. It is only with this cyclical relationship between scientists, engineers, and educators will we really be able to address the education crisis that we're currently in. Fortunately, there are a lot of groups who are starting to take on this learning engineer mentality. And they're using the science of learning to solve real-world education problems. And then they're using the data that they gain from those tools to adjust our understanding of the learning process. One of note is the Center of Teaching and Learning out of the University of Oregon. They're building interventions and assessments that are based on learning science, and then they're evaluating these programs on a large scale, and not just in your typical cookie-cutter research classroom. So the results that they get from their studies are not just saying, this is an intervention that will work for your average student, but this is an intervention that will work for this particular student. We also see out of the Learn Lab, which is at Carnegie Mellon and the University of Pittsburgh, they're building, one of the many things that they're building are online adaptive content for math instruction. So these are AI tutors that are built on a cognitive model proposed by learning scientists. And the tutor is able to see patterns in how the student is solving problems. They're uncovering certain misconceptions that the student has when working with those math problems. And then it's able to adjust the instruction to meet the needs of that individual student. And because these are designed by learning engineers, the tutors are only continuing to get better, because the data that they're using is being interpreted by learning scientists, and they're using it to refine what we know about the learning process. So far, those advances that I've described, though, only apply to cases where there already is an education infrastructure or where you have access to the internet. And that doesn't address the first problem I brought up of 101 million children not being in situations where that education is available to them. Fortunately, there are education engineers who are out there working on that problem. One group is learning equality, and they are building a solution to make these advances in the learning science and technology accessible to children who don't have a formal education system to support their learning. They do this by working with high-quality education content providers, seeding them on low-cost devices, and then creating these distribution networks where this content can be shared offline. With companies like Branching Minds and others adopting this education engineering approach, I'm really excited and optimistic about the future of education. I see a future where teachers are empowered to support all of their students, where content and instruction is personalized to meet each student where they are in the learning process, where technology can help us to understand the learning process, and we use that to shape the systems we build to support learning. A future where all of these components are used to provide children everywhere with equal opportunity to receive an education. Because all children deserve a quality education that meets their individual needs. And we're at a time where that is possible. And as learning engineers, we now have the job to make that happen. Thank you.